Bradley Beal has been a tragic figure in the NBA for years, wasting away on bad Wizards teams, being hurt on bad Wizards team, finally leaving and getting into a toxic situation with the Phoenix Suns where he once again just did not play enough, and all of that happening over the last half decade or so has caused NBA fans at large to just kind of ignore Bradley Beal to the LA Clippers. Because the conversation for so long around Beal has been his contract and his injuries, things that don't actually relate to his skill as a basketball player, and I think it's caused people to forget the fact that Bradley Beal is still very good. Obviously, injuries are a continued problem for him, and that's something that's going to continue to be an issue, but the contract is no longer an issue. The Clippers got him on an absolute steal of a contract, and Bradley Beal at $5 million a year is a much different proposition than Bradley Beal at $55 million a year, the way that he was in Phoenix. So for now, let's put aside the injury concerns and talk about Bradley Beal with the Clippers. The first thing that caught my attention when he signed with the Clippers was this concept of him coming off the bench for them. I assumed when it was announced that he was going to sign with them, and it had been rumored for a little while, even before he was actually bought out, that the Clippers would be the team. My assumption was that meant he was told he would start alongside James Harden in the backcourt because there was a decent market for him. Teams like Milwaukee would have had a really large role available for Bradley Beal, and the money wouldn't have been that different between there and the Clippers. And so I just would have assumed, given that he didn't feel great about coming off the bench in Phoenix this past season, that any situation that he chose, he would have been a starter, and the team would have told him, you are going to start, and then he would have signed there. But since he signed, there's been plenty of reporting that maybe that actually won't be the case, and that Chris Dunn would retain his starting spot alongside James Harden in the backcourt, and Bradley Beal would be coming off the bench. And to me, that is by far the best way to use Bradley Beal at this point in his career, and the most intriguing part really of the entire situation, because Beal at this point in his career as an off-the-bench scorer and a guy that could potentially in certain matchups finish games alongside of, if healthy, James Harden and Kawhi Leonard, along with all these other front court options that they now have in LA, is really, really interesting to me. And I think by far the best use of his skills at that point, because at times the Clippers last year, whether it be during the regular season or the postseason, did need more help in the backcourt. There's a reason they traded away Norm Powell for John Collins. Part of that is because they felt like they were ultimately going to get Bradley Beal, but also Powell did not really fit all that well alongside of Kawhi in the games that Kawhi played, and Beal gives them a little bit more backcourt, dynamism and creation that Norm Powell just doesn't give you. Norm Powell can be a really good shooter, a streaky shooter, but a really good shooter, whereas Beal provides a little bit more of that on-ball creation, some mid-range stuff, and I think all of that together just fits perfectly with this Clippers team, and I'm shocked that people aren't talking in a more positive way about this. It makes sense to me because of the injury stuff and Beal, just the history of Bradley Beal over the last couple of seasons, but I really like that concept of him coming off the bench, and I think people have just altered their perspective on Beal so much with things that aren't directly related to his play on the floor that have caused his reputation to decrease in a way that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. In the games that Bradley Beal played last year for the Phoenix Suns, and granted he was hurt for a lot of the games, offensively, he had a really good season. This is not a guy that averaged 9 points per game on 30% shooting. He scored the ball well. His shooting numbers were still really good, which is by far the best skill and the biggest skill he's going to bring to the Clippers. There are still a lot of good Bradley Beal moments offensively when you look at his season in Phoenix last year. Now, yes, injuries are a problem. We're going to mention that a ton. And defensively, he certainly was not paying all that much attention. He's never really been a good defender at the NBA level. But I think this situation with the Clippers provides him a perfect mix of opportunity of coming off the bench so his defense isn't as important, and a more serious basketball situation than what he's experienced really for a lot of the last handful of years of his career. Those two things coming together to provide an opportunity, not that it will happen, but an opportunity for Bradley Beal to increase his effort level and overall contribute to winning in a potentially meaningful way for the Clippers when he plays. Because when you think about the last handful of years of his career, this is the most serious basketball situation that Bradley Beal has been involved in since the 2016-17 Washington Wizards that almost made it to the conference finals, that lost in 7 in the second round of the Boston Celtics. After that, John Wall gets hurt. The Wizards are just kind of a catastrophe. He's hurt a bunch. Then he goes to Phoenix, and even though the concept was that they were going to be contenders, they're not an organized organization at all. They're firing coaches every year. They don't know what they're doing with their roster, and now you go to a Clippers team that has actually proven themselves to be one of the better organizations in the Western Conference when it comes to managing their roster and making smart decisions. Ty Lue's been there for a while and is at times one of the better, certainly defensive coaches in the league, but just in general, it's a coaching staff that takes itself seriously. And all of those factors together have never really been present for Bradley Beal all at one time in his career. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that he's all of a sudden going to be this player that contributes to winning a ton, but if it's ever going to happen, it would be in a situation like what they have with the Clippers. And I could just see a scenario where now with Chris Paul in play with the Clippers, I could see a scenario where this is just a really veteran team that, yes, is going to have issues in terms of guys missing games, but they're so deep that it really shouldn't matter all that much. And a group of guys that haven't necessarily had a lot of postseason success, Chris Paul, James Harden, and Bradley Beal together, all just kind of banding together and say, okay, like this is our chance. Like this team's really good. We could make the conference finals. We could actually add something onto our careers and onto our legacy here that just didn't really exist as an opportunity for any of those guys before. All three of those guys together, the same team, is going to be hilarious. And obviously defensively, there's all kinds of issues with those three guys ever playing a single minute of basketball together. But both Chris Paul and Bradley Beal together really give them that extra bit of offensive creation and just manipulating the offense and managing the offense that nobody other than really Harden and then sometimes Kawhi could really ever do for them last year. And obviously, there's no guarantee that this is going to work. Bradley Beal could play 20 games for the Clippers. He could go into free agency next year and get absolutely nothing. But I do think that his shooting and his skill as a scorer is very underrated at this point, given his contract, given just the wasteland that was the Phoenix Suns in his time there. And there's a situation that's possible here where Beal averages 15 points per game off the bench, finishes games for them, and then goes into the offseason next year and gets himself a nice new contract. There's going to be cap space around the league available next year. I really think it's possible that Beal's reputation and the perspective of him as a player could completely shift compared to his time in Phoenix and the end of his career in Washington to whatever happens with this year with the Clippers. And I can't believe I'm putting myself in a position where I'm defending Bradley Beal, but I really think there is just a massive gap between the perception of him as a player and how much his contract and the injuries have changed that perception over the last couple of years, when really, when he was playing well last year, there were a lot of glimpses that 80%, 90% of like peak Wizards Bradley Beal was still there for the Phoenix Suns last year. It was a weird situation because they wanted him to play point guard because they didn't have a point guard, and they brought him in to play alongside Devin Booker. Bradley Beal's not a point guard. That's not what the Clippers are going to ask him to do. They're going to ask him to, hey, maybe try and guard a little bit so that it's not a complete catastrophe, and make some shots and score and attack closeouts, and we're going to have Harden creating easy looks for you. I really think there's a lot of positive things here that people are missing because of the contract, because of the injury stuff. And it might not matter. This is an old Clippers team, a team that's done really well this offseason, to be fair, but hasn't necessarily done themselves any favors in terms of preventing potential injury issues. And it's a team that can really easily turn over most of their roster next year and the following in free agency and with their salary cap situation. But I also think they have positioned themselves to be maybe the fourth best team in the conference. OKC's better, Denver's better, Houston's probably better, obviously injuries depending, but the Clippers could have an outside chance of like making the conference finals, making some noise, and I think Bradley Beal is going to have a pretty decent part to do with that. If the Clippers hit their ceiling this year, whatever their ceiling is, regular season or postseason, I think Bradley Beal is going to have a large part to do with that, and it's really being underrated how well this could possibly go for him in LA.